Welcome to Logitique. I'm your host, Dr. Raymond Chang. President Joe Biden's 2024 budget proposal would call for a 25% minimum tax on the wealthiest Americans by closing a notorious loophole often used to avoid paying taxes on their investments. The tax proposal would eliminate the loophole by which business owners can use pass-through businesses to receive profits from their own ventures while avoiding the personal income taxes that would be incurred if they were paid the same amount directly. Now, Biden's plan, which he unveiled in the swing state of Philadelphia with remarks to union members on Thursday, would also reverse Trump-era tax cuts for Americans making more than $400,000 per year to 39.6%, rather than the 37% pay following the enactment of former President Donald Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Now, in this episode, we'll look at not just the tax hike, but how it's going to be affecting America, particularly the 2024 presidential elections. Now, according to Joe Biden, his budget proposal is built on the so-called four key values: lowering the costs for families, protecting and strengthening Social Security and Medicare, investing in America, and reducing the deficit by ensuring that the wealthiest in America and big corporations begin to pay their fair share, and cutting wasteful spending on big pharmaceutical companies, big oil companies, and other special interests. Whoa, wait. Did you hear that? Ensuring that the wealthiest in America and big corporations begin to pay their fair share. Begin to pay. So you mean they have never paid their fair share before? Oh my. Now actually the figure 39.6%, in Biden's tax hike also reminds me of something else, and that is the former President Bill Clinton. Why? As it was once said that Bill Clinton's tax hike, which raised tax from 36%, if you still remember that was in 1993, to 39.6%. Now that was a 10% hike, if you still remember that, and that's why 3.6%, 39.6%. Now, and that prospered the U.S. economy. What do you remember that? Well, that was known as the Clinton's tax defense. Now, when pressed about the harmful effects on the economy, proponents of higher taxes often fall back on what can be called the Clinton defense. Former U.S. President Bill Clinton pushed a major tax increase through Congress in 1993. And so the story goes, the economy boomed. So increased tax, the economy goes up. What kind of a logic is that? Now, if you buy into this kind of a rationale, how could tax increases be so bad for the economy? Let's increase tax. Now, the inference here is even stronger, that higher taxes actually strengthen the economy. Is that true? Of course not. Now, the Clinton defense is superficially plausible, but it fails under closer scrutiny. Economic growth was solid but hardly spectacular in the years immediately following the 1993 tax increase. The real economic boom actually occurred in the latter half of the decade, which was after the 1997 tax cut. Now, low taxes are actually still a key to a strong economy. Now, indeed, the year 1997 was a watershed for both tax policies and the economy. By 1997, the post-Cold War economy had entered into a sustained expansion. No bad news, everyone has good hope for the future. The employment rate was just 5.3%, a level thought at the time to be roughly consistent with full employment. Similarly, capacity utilization rates hovered around 82.5% again, now roughly consistent with full employment of the U.S. industrial capacity. So now with a mature expansion and the economy running at what was believed to be about full capacity, growth would normally be expected to ease back as the economy makes the transition from recovery to normal growth after the Cold War. Now it was not a moment when one would expect growth to accelerate. So in 1997, the Republican-led Congress passed a tax relief and a deficit reduction bill that was resisted but ultimately signed by President Clinton. Now, according to the U.S. Treasury's original estimates, the 1990 tax cuts was relatively modest, amounting to just 0.11%. So that was less than 1% of the GDP, of the US GDP in its first year, and just 0.22% of the GDP by its fourth year. Now in 1997, the fourth year effect would be roughly equivalent to a reduction in the overall tax burden of about $30 billion US. But despite its modest size, tax cut advocates had high expectation for the tax cuts' effects on the economy because the reduction in the capital gains tax rate was expected to unleash a torrent of entrepreneurial and venture capacity activity. They were not disappointed. Now, in fact, some 25 years have passed, and a growing body of literature indicates that higher taxes are associated with a smaller economy. So the more one taxes on something, the less there is of the item taxed. But whatever the theoretical debates, the proof, as they say, is in the pudding. President Clinton raised taxes, yet the economy grew and grew smartly in the latter half of the 1990s. Now, even though we now know this is not true. Now, this rationale has been repeatedly used not just during the years of Bill Clinton, not just the times of Bill Clinton, but also during the time when Hillary Clinton ran for president. And now Biden's doing exactly the same. Tax hikes. Now, you know what he was trying to tell you? Now elect me, and I will tax the rich for you, and you will enjoy a better economy. And Biden said, this is going to be the first time the rich are ever taxed. You still believe in him? Oh. Now, the real problem comes. Remember the midterms election just last year? The Republicans barely win. Now, the Republican Party of today is so different from that in the 1990s. The overwhelming whiteness of the party, even before the ascendance of Donald Trump, made it very difficult to recruit African Americans and Latinos in large numbers, which means less voters for the Republican Party. And given the fact that the Democrats, have been pushing those Me Too campaigns and gender issues that favors the left, Republicans are fighting an even more difficult war. Now, and that also includes the fact that Trump had driven away many of the professionals who have served in the past Republican administrations, including the small clique of new conservatives. Now, what remains within the Republican Party is enough to win only state and local elections in certain areas of the country. But it is not enough to win nationally. So going forward, with the further demographic shift, this Republican base will get older and smaller. Moreover, on foreign policy, Trump fans are going to be leading the party in a nationalist, so-called apocalyptic direction that challenges the party leadership. So why am I telling you this? This is because no one is going to come to the rescue this time. Now, once Biden pushed through the tax hike, there will be no Republican to come for the tax cut this time. Now, okay, with a Republican tax cut being somewhat unlikely, where is the U.S. economy heading this time? Now, in order to understand this, let's go back to the year 2000. While China was still a developing country back then, Russia should be the major competitor for the United States of America back in 2000. Now, but if you still remember, U.S.-Russia relations were so good, if not excellent. On June 5, 2000, U.S. President Bill Clinton gave his first address, actually it's the first ever address by an American president, to the Russian Duma. Clinton encouraged Russia to continue to build democratic institutions and engage other nations both diplomatically and economically, and pledged to cooperate with Russian efforts to build a stronger economy. He also said that the United States had no hostility towards Russia and that the United States' desire to build an anti-missile defense system was not a threatening move. Who was the Russian president back then? Boris Yeltsin. Now, so 25 years passed, and today it is China. Now, do you think there is a slightest chance that Joe Biden is going to be addressing the Chinese in Beijing? How I wish. Now, this is highly unlikely. Now, if U.S.-China relations were that good, China could have worked with the U.S., just as what happened in 2008, right after the financial tsunami. So this time, the U.S. turned to India. And because they need to turn, that is why major Western media, for example, like The Economist, now advocates that global firms are eyeing Asian alternatives to Chinese manufacturing. Now this is natural, actually, as I've said before in some other episodes, that more and more American businesses are now hiring CEOs of Indian origin. So now, and even if they don't, some of the tech giants are also focusing on India, as they're somehow worried about expanding in China. Look at Apple. Look at Apple, for instance. Now, reported by Bloomberg just this Thursday, Apple is changing the way that its international businesses are managed in order to focus more attention on India. So India is set to be its own sales region within Apple, which will give the country increased prominence within the company. Now, though most people in India use Android devices, it is still the second largest smartphone market in the world, and Apple has the the potential to make inroads with more affordable product options. But wait, there are currently no physical Apple retail locations in India right now, so Apple has been working to open stores in Mumbai and New Delhi for years now. Now, Apple really did started hiring for the stores in January, which means they could open in the near future. But the point here is, while the grass grows, the horse starves. Why? Yes, I know both China and India are the only countries with populations of over 1 billion people, but according to the World Data Lab, China has the largest middle-class market globally, with over 900 million people. And together they are spending over 22 billion per day. That's almost twice the current value of Twitter's total assets. And by 2030, the middle class of China will reach 1.2 billion. Now, look at India. The middle class population of India is around 400 million right now and is expected to reach 800 million, well, that's today's China, in around 2030. And now you know why I've just said that, yeah, the grass is growing, but the horse is still starving. Well, there is substantial momentum in India, but the US economy just cannot wait. So, could a Republican pop up and challenge Biden in 2024 so that they somehow change the direction? Probably not. Not at this moment. Now back to the Democrats. Now, according to recent research, only 37% of the Democrats want Joe Biden to seek for a second term. Now, the percentage actually went down from 52% in the weeks right before last year's midterm elections, in which the Democrats so-called defeated the Republican Party's expected red wave, and which, if you still remember, the red wave didn't really work. And so it is clear that the Democrats want a fresh face 2024, and there are still no clear heavyweight contestant emerging to challenge Joe. Now, that explains why Biden has given enough signal so far that he intends to seek for a second term in 2024 presidential election. There is just very little bit of a challenge. Now, if Biden is really going to do a second term and that there's no Republican tax cut plan to come to the rescue, the US could be more likely to be affected by the new conservatives. We'll remember them from my last episode, where a regional military conflict, if not war, could become imminent. So until then, ciao.
Before you leave, please be sure to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share this with your friends. See you in the next episode.